we have a question already. Huh? Yeah. We have to light the inner fire. We have to light the inner fire.
So am I done with my question?
So I already received the first question, which is how do we define Vedanta, and is there, because we talked about Vedanta and near-death experience, and what's the relation between Vedanta and Hinduism, and so I think we won't spend too much time on this. That's a whole topic in itself, but Vedanta primarily is that which is taught in the Upanishads. Vedanta means the Veda Anta. Veda means knowledge. Anta means the end or the culmination of knowledge, which is found also at the Anta, at the end of the Vedas, the scriptures of India, which is the Upanishads. And so Vedanta is that which is taught in the Upanishads primarily. So it's the doctrine of the basis of everything that we see and know and are. What we ourselves are is infinite consciousness, is divinity, is pure existence, and that it boils down to that what we're seeing is we're not seeing correctly, and how to realize it. So it's of course it gets to be a more involved philosophy, but that's the core nugget of it. And so Hinduism has Vedanta at its core. So all of Hinduism, in a sense, is an expression of Vedanta, and all religions, from that standpoint, really are expressions of Vedanta. We can understand the Vedanta is like the philosophy of religion itself. We can, as a student of Vedanta, I can appreciate Islam and Christianity and Judaism, all of them, though they're so different, because it's not on the level of doctrines or dogmas. It's on the level of principles, of not principles, but of the one principle of divinity that lies at the root of all. So that's my short answer to that question. And
I have a question.
Question?
Yeah, a quick comment.
Oh.
I just want to tell everybody that, interestingly enough, Robert Redford is doing a movie right now. It's based on the concept that he proves past lives, and he proves that there's a better past life, and it causes global suicide. The movie that's being done right now, and it was very interesting to address that. Thank you very much.
This is another area in which some researchers are beginning to study, because there are children who report remembering previous lives. And have you heard about this, Moran? There are some scientific studies being done where they do try to eliminate for imagination and possibly hearing about things, and find that yes, there are children who remember previous lives, and the fact can be checked out. Most often these are people who have died accidental deaths, or even deaths at the hands of another. And so they come back still remembering their previous lives, maybe in a nearby town or village. So it's a kind of somewhat tangential to our topic today, but of that they're starting to find real evidence for this.
So what you're saying,
Swami, the Anita Morjani experiences that we had talked, you were mentioning about, for some reason, coming back to body of all these people that they have experienced out of body death experiences, is that when they come back to this life again, that I missed within those 12 things that I think that it's worth mentioning, is that they are going to, when they come back, they experience a better life than they had before, because they are enlightened, they understand the purpose this time, and all of, not all of them, that I don't know of all of them, but most of them that I have read about, when they come back to this body again, they have completely a different life, which is much better, much prosperous. Even Anita Morjani.
Yes. Her case is quite more remarkable. Yes.
Anita was suffering of cancer, and she was talking about her body, that it was having blisters all over.
Yes.
During her, time that she was experiencing that out-of-body experience, and she could see in 3 months after she came back to her body, the whole hospital in Singapore, they were amazed, everyone, that how these blisters are healing, and her body was flooded by cancer, and everywhere it was oozing out, and she came back. Within 3 months, everything was gone, and she
That's
came back,
right.
and then she inspired to write that book,
Right.
and then met with Dr. Dyer, and then her life is
Yeah.
different.
So she's become well known now.
Well-known,
I think
famous,
more. Yes.
rich, and I have known so many people.
But that's not the point of.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. It's not the point. Of course, it's not the point. What I'm saying is that they come back to the body, but then they live in the same form in a much prosperous way in every way.
That maybe that, especially in these cases, if you go and read the reports, some of the less famous ones, you can say, just because there's thousands of them now you can read, you will find, yes, people are, their lives are transformed in general, but it doesn't mean that they always have an easy time of it. Sometimes they struggle a lot. They still have to struggle a lot, and have to oftentimes have to get out of certain life situations that they're in. Now they have the strength to be able to do it, but it's still a lot of struggle. But that's true, that people's lives are transformed by the experience, because they know that they're not bodies, they are infinite spirit. They know that love lies at the root of all. That's a good point. You had your hand up urgently.
Well, my father had an out-of-body experience. He was going down in an airplane, and he just saw such peace. He was 20 years old. I'm not sure it had much of an effect on his life after, but I know, he wrote about it.
Uh-huh.
He had that experience. But from a Buddhist tradition, when the soul actually decides to stay, or is in heaven, or whatever, not heaven, but when it does transition and doesn't come back, my question is there the concept of the bardos in Hinduism, where the soul goes for 49 days and experiences, different path, and then begins to, then after 49 days, reincarnates? Is there that philosophy?
I think Tibetan Buddhism has specially developed these different states which the departing soul experiences, and their emphasis, though, on those states is that in each one of those states there is the possibility of attaining a true enlightenment and realization and freedom. So that's their emphasis also, and that also will be the emphasis of Vedanta, that the purpose of life, or the purpose of in whatever state we may be, is to attain freedom, to know who we are, and to attain freedom from the shackles of karma, from the shackles of our ignorance. And there is a concept called a gradual liberation in Hinduism, in Vedanta we can say, for those people who have made a lot of spiritual progress in this life but aren't yet fully illumined. It's called krama mukti. In that case, reincarnation is not necessary, but from that, after leaving the body, they continue their spiritual practices in some kind of loka, in some kind of heavenly realm, or a kind of very subtle realm called Brahma Loka, and from there they gradually attain to the full illumination, the mukti. So that may have some.
So what is the Hindu philosophy when the soul transitions to?
I'm not familiar with all the ideas of how many days, but usually there's for 2 weeks, those who are left behind, they will practice special mourning, and after 2 weeks there's a ceremony performed for the welfare of the departed soul called the Shraddha ceremony, in which offerings are made to the departed person, and then those offerings are shared. And the idea is that this will help the soul in its onward journey. And then Hindus generally will do that ceremony every year on the anniversary of the death of their parents or other close relatives to help them. And there's a pilgrimage that many Hindus will make to Gaya, which is in Bihar, where that's especially a holy city for doing these special rituals for the welfare of their ancestors, which is said to help their ancestors. In our monastic tradition, after the 2 weeks, we do a special worship of Sri Ramakrishna and then have a big feast, cooking also especially those dishes which that Swami particularly liked. So that's our order's tradition. Any comment, Moran?
What's the relationship of this subject to renunciation?
Which subject?
Your subject.
The near-death experience? Well, what are you driving at? I feel embarrassed to answer his questions because he's a senior monk. I'm like a baby at his feet.
They're trick questions.
Well, and clearly it makes renunciation a lot easier because we can understand that we are not this body, so attachment is.
I don't know. Maybe it stimulates the desire to be born again and again.
To be born again and again.
I was thinking the same thing.
But we don't find that. We find that the people who have these experiences, they don't want to come back to the body.
I was thinking, how about if there's somebody who has struggled and reached that state, and they feel like in a way that there are, because we don't remember our lives in the past, that there were certain things that we weren't able to, I guess, experience in this life that others had. So, like, being able to have come to that place where we have been able to reach that enlightenment within ourselves, being able to come back and have a life where you can actually practice and live in that, and of course we have to go through everything again, but like to experience those things. I don't know.
Well, that's I guess maybe that relates to the Swami's question. A time comes when we feel like, no, we've had enough. And when that time comes, then we know, as the saying goes, we know that the hour has struck. When we've had enough of the endless chasing after the things of this world, whether it be love or wealth or power or fame. Yes, this world has all these things to offer. It's offering us fame. Look, you can be famous. Look, you can be rich. Look, you can have a beautiful husband. You can have a beautiful wife. Look, you can have all these enjoyments. You can have lots of chocolate ice cream. You can have it. And see how you enjoy it. Go for it. And then we do go for it, and we find that we get it. And yet,
There's nothing better than
we find dissatisfaction. We find that I'm still the same old me. And Swami Atmarupananda, in his talk in Hollywood a couple of weeks ago, he made a wonderful point that, our lives seem so ordinary. Most of our lives seem very ordinary. But we look at the rich and famous and we think, their lives must be extraordinary. Because look at them, they're all glamorous and the glossy pictures. And the rich and famous people have this problem, that they say, I'm rich and famous, but my life is so ordinary. They also think their life should be extraordinary, but it isn't. Everybody's life is ordinary. And the main point of his talk, or of this part of the talk, was beautifully put, was that life is ordinary as long as it's not spiritual life. When we start to have spiritual life, then it becomes extraordinary. So that spiritual life is the science, as it were, of making our ordinary lives extraordinary. Otherwise,
Is there life after death of the mind?
what do you mean by life?
Well, what do you mean by that?
Ordinarily, we think of life as me leading a separate existence in a body. And when we say life after death, we think, well, I'm still living in some sense. But in some ways, life after death doesn't make sense. There's no life after death, at least no life in a physical body. But consciousness continues.
Did you hear what I asked?
You said, is there life after the death of the mind? So you can't say life. Would you generally, from the Vedantic perspective, we call it something else. Consciousness continues. But life, actually, even after the death of the body, we could call it life to a certain extent as long as prana is still involved. Life force. What do you say? Just someone who hasn't asked a question. Mm. Mm.
Yes. So when you were giving your lecture, Swami, what struck me was when you were talking about the life review.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it was very, very moving, very touching. And I just wanted to get more information on where to get that passage. Because to me, it was like a treasure.
Mm-hmm. This is from that website. I've spent a lot of hours perusing the website. Not really in preparation for this talk, just because I'm interested. And ended up being a good preparation for this talk, but and I can send you a link, but then afterwards you have to give me your email address, and I can, or you can send me an email. My email address is my name, Mahayogananda, at Vedanta.org, our website. And my name you can get from the bulletin or something, so that might be a little bit easy to remember.
Was there a near-death experience full of pain and suffering?
That's an interesting question. There are a few, very few, negative people have negative experiences, and generally they're not common. But that's also in accord with Vedanta. What we have here, we'll have there people who have been leading very negative lives may find themselves in some kind of hellish realm. There's a tragic near-death experience report by a young woman who I don't remember. I think she was anyhow, she was living a very negative life with her boyfriend who was torturing her also, and somehow they both died at the same time. I don't remember if they both got overdosed on a drug or something. And she found they were in some kind of hellish realm where there were demons tearing at her flesh and terrible suffering. And she screamed out in desperation, "God, help me." And then she was pulled out of it. She was pulled out of it. And afterwards, she was resuscitated, and she lived to tell the tale. But her boyfriend died, didn't come back, was not resuscitated. So she is left with this image of her boyfriend of the time in hell, actually in hell. Now, Vedanta always says hell is not permanent. There is no such thing as a permanent hell, and we don't generally talk about it. But yes, after death there are heavenly realms, and for particularly wicked people, there are also hell realms. That's accepted in Vedanta also. But it's not, Swami Vivekananda definitely didn't like, and I think we don't like, religion is not to be taught through fear. Fear of hell is not a good reason for practicing religion, a good inspiration. What we emphasize positive. The religion of fear was the old religion, and it's tragic to lead your life out of fear of something. Rather, lead your life for love. Lead your life for positivity. Please.
So I was wondering if, like this woman that you're talking about that asked, God help me, if that seems like a real moment of grace, she would say that. But how would her life, you mentioned how Anita was her name.
Anita
How her life
Orjani.
was different in the sense of enlightenment, I guess.
Mm.
And still, what are the struggles of the people that have had these near-death experiences? Sounds like a really, I'm kind of jealous in a way. That experience.
Yeah, that was the best.
It sounds good, but and of course, as spiritual experiences, don't we look at it in the way that if it's spiritual, it does transform the life?
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, a drug experience would qualify, right? Where you experience bliss or whatever. But if it doesn't transform the life, so are these people that have near-death experience, are their lives transformed, and is there documentation of their lives?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the things that Jeffrey Long asks on his questionnaire. Is he asks specific questions about your life before the near-death experience and your life after the near-death experience, including what was your religion before, what was your religion after, did you fear death before, do you fear death now, how do you characterize your relations with other people before, how do you characterize your relations with people now. He asks all these kind of pointed questions to try to get some statistics on do they
criteria.
Right, and he finds that yes, that people's lives are transformed, and I think it depends because we find people have different levels of experience. Some people go as far as knowing that they're not their bodies, but don't go on to have the really profound experiences which we've been discussing. I've picked the cream of the crop.
Right.
These are really the most profound experiences. There are many of them, but not all of them go that far. But here's something interesting. This website, which was set up to receive and tabulate near-death experiences, he started getting submissions from people who had not nearly died, but who had had very similar experiences. And they said they'll write, I don't know where else to share this because there's no place to share it, but it's actually very similar to what these people have experienced, though I didn't nearly die. I didn't have my heart didn't stop. In some cases, it's people who have had what's called a fear-death experience, where they almost died. They almost have a car crash, and it's about to be an accident, and they have this experience, and then it turns out that the car doesn't crash. And so they're actually physically unharmed, but they had an experience very, very similar. Other people, even at the time of meditation, have these what are called STEs, spiritually transformative experiences. So Jeffrey Long has actually started another website, I believe, to especially address spiritually transformative experiences, which is different from near-death experiences. Now, the special value of near-death experiences in study is that if it can be demonstrated that the person was actually dead, that the brain was not functioning, this provides the kind of proof to scientists that consciousness can exist outside of matter, that consciousness doesn't depend on brain function. Spiritually transformative experiences are very inspiring for us, but the scientists can say, well, that's just conjured up by your brain. Now, you also mentioned drug experiences. There are people who, they're very different. They're not transformative. Drug experiences are not transformative. There may be some kind of good feeling, but it's qualitatively very different. And there are some interesting descriptions of people who have had drug experiences leading to spiritual experiences, and the difference that at a certain point it's a drug experience, and then suddenly maybe it's an overdose of a drug, suddenly it's becoming a near-death experience or a spiritually transformative experience. And it's different. It's markedly different from the experience of the drug.
And that's on this website.
On this website, you can find some of those.
I have a comment. When I was about 15 years old, I had overdosed on cocaine.
Mm.
And I was walking out of the room, and I remember wanting to go towards the bathroom, but something kept me going. And next thing I know, this part of me could be because of the drugs, but the whole thing, the experience is something. The next thing I know, I was on a conveyor belt. And when I looked to the right and to the left of me, they were nothing but dead bodies. Mm-hmm. And there were two people in front of me, and one illuminated like Satan, and one was like God, and the one that was Satan was saying, she's dead, and the other one was the one who actually put his finger down my throat and brought me back.
Oh.
And the interesting thing is that my friend who was the one who illuminated Satan, she was the one who was in panic, and she was thinking that I was dying, and the other one was actually the dealer, and so one who doesn't believe in God, one who does believe in God, and then the very next day, after that weekend, I went to home, and I didn't use anything the rest of the weekend, but we were for 15, and we had somebody who was supplying all kinds of drugs to us, and it was at an 8-ball. And I grabbed it, I told my friend that he gave it to me to hide, and they said, look at it, and I went and got it, and my friends were wanting to like smoke it up or something, and I think I probably would have died, we would have overdosed on that, because when it just happened to me, it was my thought, but we were waiting in the car for my father to leave so we can go into the house, and at that time, we kind of drifted off to sleep, somebody was knocking on the window, and it was my uncle, and my uncle was in Diamond Bar, and my mom was there, and they ended up taking me to a Christian girls' school, where it was kind of more like a reform school type of thing, where there was like, but it was my sanctuary. It became my sanctuary where I got grounded and fed, with God and Christ. But the thing is that I had always gone through confirmation, CCD, all that church. I never heard any truth of what God was and what those things. And it was the third day that I was there that I accepted Christ in my heart. And so, in essence, that drug overdose and what had happened put me into the life where I got to know God. So it was a good experience for me. And I had another time where I did have my heart stop in a car accident. That one I don't remember. I don't recall anything. But I know that there was a huge transformation after that for me, where it was almost, it was my first awakening that I had.
Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Swami, a question. In terms of when you're talking about the Buddhist traditions and the Hindu thoughts and death in the 2 weeks, and is there some substance in terms of a yearly anniversary celebration on the day that person's dying? I mean, here we are on this planet in the solar system, and they're talking of infinity in the universe. Is there something about the annual celebration of a loved one or one that was an awful person on that year? It's a very generic question. I just wonder if you have a sort of a generic comment on the yearly anniversary of the death.
Isn't
positive
time,
or negative?
It's this life.
Well, I was asking Swami
Substance. No, I'm talking about time.
Well,
in the context of the solar year and our planets, and we celebrate things once a year.
yes. Well, I suppose that annually, in many traditional cultures, and in Hinduism is no exception, the ancestors, people could name their ancestors back 7 generations or even 14 generations, and are taught as children to memorize the names of your ancestors going back, because and to cultivate a feeling of gratitude towards our ancestors, that our ancestors have provided us with this body, but also with education, with really everything we see here is provided by our ancestors in one sense. These buildings, these bodies. So to honor them seems like a natural inclination of the human heart, to honor our ancestors. And if we had a loved father or mother, we have a desire that they should still be that we still have a desire for their welfare even after they've left the body. So then we would perform some kind of ritual honoring them and praying for their continued path into the light, as it were, or however you want to conceive of that.
The annual, yearly anniversary thing, does that factor into that at
Oh, well, it's common to many cultures, Buddhist and Hindu cultures especially.
I have a question. Apparently, even though, individual consciousness, as you can see, your near-death experience appears to be able to see and hear without the body.
Yeah.
So, my first question is, why would it ever want to come back to the body? The only way I can answer that is that even though it's out of body, it's individual consciousness, it still does not have the realization of being one with the cosmic consciousness. Otherwise, if it did, it wouldn't want to come back, because after all, this world is referred to as dukh lok. You've heard that expression.
The realm of suffering.
Yeah, dukh lok. Yeah, I mean, everybody describes it like that. In Hinduism, it's very commonly described as dukh lok.
So?
And Buddha also described it as dukh lok.
Uh-huh.
So, only a consciousness which does not have the realization would want to come back. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Uh-huh.
So, even though your individual consciousness outside the body, you're still where you were in the body. And in fact, in the next life, you basically start off from that point. There's no progress made, even though you've been away from a human form for over 800 years. You still come back to the point at which you left, isn't it? I mean, and you still don't even remember anything about it,
So is there a question or?
No, my question is, why?
Why? That's the
Here
difficulty.
it is, no realization in the individual consciousness state.
Now see here. When we see, we have this conception in Vedanta of who are we. This idea of different sheaths. We have a subtle body, and the subtle body is like the gross body, except it doesn't have a gross body, but it still can perceive and has certain senses and all those things. And that the first kind of out-of-body experience, experiencing through the subtle body. Now, gradually, some of these more transcendent experiences in near-death experience clearly are going shedding the subtle body also, and that wonderful experience of the woman whose ego dissolved. The ego, that's the root of our ignorance. We think we're separate beings. When that dissolves, there's no one left to want to come back. It's all, one realizes oneself as the infinite. So that's the experience.
Happening when you're away. I mean, outside the body, that experience is happening outside the body?
We read today in the talk.
Is happening outside?
This woman, some people have these realizations, yes. Now, I did mention that the people, when they come back, they're not saints, generally, although they're more saintly and they have had genuine experiences of divinity. But why aren't they saints? I think it's because saints have led a whole life of spiritual practice. They've gained mastery over their minds and senses. They've gradually started to experience who they really are. They've gradually started to experience God more and more. And so step by step, stage by stage, purifying and purifying, they attain to illumination and they become saints. Now, in the near-death experience, some of these near-death experiences, it's as if you get a special get out of jail free card or something, and you get to cut in the front of the line without doing all that preparation, and you have an experience, and you get yes, you get a sneak peek, yes, and yet then when you come back, you still have all those things which the saint has already worked through that you have to work through. So that's.
I was talking of rebirth more than I was talking of rebirth. Because in rebirth, you basically start off from where you left off in the previous life.
Well, that's that I would say that's conjecture. But Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna ensures us
on the law of
that.
Karma. I mean, you start off.
Okay. Well, it's hard to.
So there is really nothing like post-mortem emancipation as you mentioned. I mean, it all happens here.
Well, there is krama mukti. This is post-mortem emancipation when one has made significant spiritual progress. We discussed this at the beginning. There is this idea that one can continue spiritual practice after leaving the body and attain to illumination. I think the point is that Vedanta always emphasizes here and now. This is where we can realize divine is right here, right now. We just need to open our eyes and realize it. And of course, we love to do that. We love to theorize and conjecture, well, after death, reincarnation, how long does it take to reincarnate? And do we learn anything on the other side? Why do we forget everything? We like to think about all these things, but actually, that's just spinning our wheels. We're not really making spiritual progress. A little bit is great to increase our faith, to strengthen our conviction that we are not bodies, that we are pure spirit. That's why I love to read these. But to start to philosophize about all the details of reincarnation, that's not helping us to move forward in spiritual life. What helps us to move forward in spiritual life is to become more unselfish, to feel for others, to practice spiritual disciplines like prayer and meditation and service, to turn our whole lives into spiritual practice. That's what we're called on to do. Please.
Question. Most of it you already have answered it, but I'll just repeat it so I can carry on with my last part of the question. One was that people who reported positive experiences, you said generally, and then I was going to ask you if somebody did report it negative, and you already answered yes, they did. And you also mentioned that the religion should not be out of fear, but out of love for most. But I think this statement can be understood in a different perspective, because according to Gita, again, this is based on what scriptures are telling, that when the soul departs, the good person's soul is welcomed by saints, and the persons who do bad things, like demons and other people, come and they see those suffering. I think some of the people who have reported negative experiences, and if they do come back, is an opportunity for them to now do the correct thing, so they may not end up with that fate. So I think that negativity which we think that is being perceived as a fear from the religion is not really a fear, but a kind of a warning sign, so to speak. It's not only for, yes, of course, Vedantic principle to be a good person, evolve, merge with divine. I mean, these are supreme goals, undeniable. But the fact of the matter is, if one does not do the right thing, most people are unaware of the fact that they can be met with some harsh treatments which they possibly can work with while they are alive.
Yes, Swami Vivekananda faced many people who said, if you take away the fear of God, the fear of judgment, why will people be moral? But he never accepted that. He always emphasized the positive. He did not believe in the religion of fear. He said he would never do anything to make a child afraid. And that includes how children are sent to some kind of Sunday school and taught if you're bad, you're going to go to hell. It's children. They get terrified. It spoils religion. Religion has nothing to do. So, at least from our Vedantic standpoint, in our tradition following Swami Vivekananda, we reject that kind of religion, which is teaching fear. Now, Gita also, I'm not familiar with any part of Gita where it describes demons meeting the soul after it leaves, but Sri Krishna does say in the Bhagavad Gita that the last thought one has when leaving the body it determines the course of the soul after leaving the body. And this is a good lesson. This is something to keep in mind. What's the last thought in our minds when we leave the body? Now, the last thought is generally going to reflect that trend of our minds that's built up over our whole lifetimes. If we spend our whole lifetime thinking of money, and think that at the last moment we'll think of God, forget it. The last moment, we're also going to think of God. There was a story of the man who was a miser. He had collected gold coins, hundreds of gold coins, and he was on his deathbed. And so he instructed his son, you put this suitcase of this trunk of coins, you put them in the attic, so that on my way up to heaven, I'm going to take them with me. And they're like, Dad, you can't take it with you. No, you put them up there, I tell you. I will take them with me. So somehow he put the coins up there, and sure enough, the old man died. And then they went up to look at the coins, and they found the coins were still there. And he said, and the son said, "Aha! I knew it. I should have put them in the basement." But anyhow, that's a joke. But we do have wealth that we take with us. We have the great wealth. What wealth is that? All our good actions, all our good thoughts, all our spiritual practice. We don't lose that. Sri Krishna says in the Gita, we don't lose even a little bit of dharma, of what we do. We don't lose it. We take it with us. And if we don't realize in this lifetime, we don't lose anything of what we have done. Yes, we may have to come back. Then we come back and take up, as you say, take up where we left off in our spiritual life. That's why we see in life, no? Some people seem to be from childhood they're interested in religion. They're saintly. They're good. And other people, they're not interested at all. They're engaged in all kinds of negative actions. I would like to add an addendum also to this idea of the final thought, because there was one near-death experience report of a man who was shot. And as he was leaving the body, the last thing that he noticed, and he noticed it vividly, was a piece of chewing gum stuck to the bottom of his shoe. And it sounds funny, actually. Some of these it's kind of gruesome, the way he was shot. He was mistaken for somebody else, and it was a gang thing, and so he was shot. And he saw this chewing gum stuck to the bottom of his shoe. And he was wondering and worrying whether the chewing gum had stained the rug in his new car. And so this was the thought with which he left his body. And yet, he had a very positive experience. He had a profound and transformative experience after leaving the body and experiencing the light. So even though Sri Krishna guides us that the last thought we think helps determine our path, but there's also grace. There's also grace, and that we have to acknowledge that also.
It was a neutral thought on his behalf.
Neutral. It's a neutral thought, yes. It's not a negative thought, but it is interesting that it wasn't especially a thought of God. What comes out of most people's mouths just before they strike another in a car accident, just before just for the crash. Some people say, "Oh God," but a lot of people out will come four-letter words. Yeah. Yes, a lot of people. Yeah. So see, we can test ourselves, no? If we have a near crash, or something happens, or an earthquake starts shaking, what comes out of our mouths? That gives us
even without a crash, many times,
I've made it one of my little triggers to remember God.
Yes, it's a good.
Swami, can I say something?
Yeah.
So also, right before we go to sleep, deep sleep is an important time to purify the mind. And so in those times when we're having some sort of discord, more than likely we'll.
Yes, that one of our senior monks is a great supporter of this practice. He called there's the state between waking and sleep, and again between sleep and waking, are called hypnopompic and hypnagogic. I'm not sure which one is which. I forget. But waking what? Hypnagogic is when we're waking up from sleep, but we're not yet fully awake. And hypnopompic is when we're falling asleep, but not yet fully asleep. And he says that this is a great opportunity because the normal defenses of the mind are down. And we can drive ideas deep into the subconscious mind. So if at that time we can repeat our mantra, if we have a mantra, repeat our mantra, it drives it much deeper into the mind than we are ordinarily able to do during the waking state.
even for learning, that state is supposed to be the most receptive state.
Receptive state. So we make use of that to drive spiritual ideas. And you have a...
Actually, pertaining that, my best friend died about a month ago.
I see.
Came back.
I see,
And he, a month prior to his passing, he had a partner.
I see.
He had the most serious one. Had he not been in the emergency room, he would have died. Anyhow, he had a dream a month prior, which was very similar to everything you just spoke about. And it was so vivid, he called me and he wrote it out, discussed it. And he had the elements of, he found himself in a room with no walls, with a group of people, and they were all talking. They were like sages. They were talking, asking questions. It affected him so profoundly, and he couldn't get it out of his mind. He had a heart attack. They brought him back to life. And during his heart attack, he had no experience whatsoever.
I see.
Zero. So it was almost like precognition. He had this experience prior in his dreams.
Interesting.
I thought that was amazing because I know about what you're talking about.
Yes.
That's the first time I've heard about it. It affected me very deeply. It was the same thing, but it was a dream.
Might be interesting for him to submit that to this website. I'm sure they'd appreciate that that information. Please.
Okay.
And
if
then
you
you.
look at the most educated people in the world, like Ivy School type people, or they totally, for the most part, they don't believe in reincarnation or resurrection. I mean, those kind of things. They just see what life is. And most of the people who are spiritually mature have a more open mind to it, that it's possible. And even if it's not possible, like you were saying something. So why the educated people, the most educated people don't believe in reincarnation or something?
Well, this is we discussed this a little at the beginning of the talk about the sledgehammer blows of modern science are crushing the porcelain foundations of dualistic religions, of the old myths of religion. They don't stand up to science. So science is very convincing, and that's why I think it's a great field. This field of near-death experiences, where we're getting proof that consciousness continues in the absence of brain function. This is the kind of evidence that we need to convince people who are. But I don't know if it's how educated. It's certainly the certain kind of education, but the real education is to learn.
I mean,
academic. Yes, academic. Most. Yes, that's true. You had a question.
Oh yeah, I was wondering if you have any thoughts, or if they talked at all about the effect of the near-death experiences on the people around those who had the near-death experience. And reason I ask is I lost my grandfather-in-law. It wasn't a near-death experience; it was a death experience.
Yes.
And I've just been petrified since. Like, I was never afraid of death before that.
Yes.
And it's been a year, and I've just been petrified.
Of death.
Of death, yeah.
Yes.
It was the first time I've seen death.
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
43, but it was the first time I've seen it. So
yes.
I was wondering if there was any discussion around the impact on those around the people experience the near-death experience.
I don't think Jeffrey Long hasn't put that into his questionnaire, so he hasn't specifically discussed that. But some people do relate about some people end up doing work in hospice and things like that and sharing their experience. When they do share it, they're not sharing it widely, though some people like Anita Moorjani are sharing it widely and influencing a lot of people. But sharing people who are suffering from terminal illnesses, and they'll go and talk about it. Or someone will write, well, I shared my experience with my father when he was on his deathbed and gave him a lot of solace, a lot of courage to face death. So I think it does. People who have had that experience, they have the conviction that I'm not going to die. I can't, because I died already and I didn't die, so I don't die. So that conviction, they're able to convey and give faith to people who haven't had the experience. Most of us haven't had the experience. Yet, even for me, to read these experiences has been very reassuring that, yes, the teachings of Vedanta are true, very inspiring. So I would encourage you to have a look at some of these experiences. There's an allied another allied experience in this near-death research, another fascinating thing called a shared death experience. Someone is dying, and a loved one is by their side, and when the person leaves the body, that person who's sitting by the side also goes through the experience and becomes separated from their bodies, and accompanies the departing soul for a certain for a certain distance. And I personally know someone who had that experience, and there are a number of these recorded also. So it's fascinating. It generally happens when the relation between the person who's dying and the person who's is there is a very deep emotional bond. We see this kind of thing happening.
After your lecture, I felt like quoting the man who said, "My mind is made up. Don't confuse me with facts."
So thank you very much.
Thank you very
much. Wonderful to talk with all of you.